It is 6:30, so we'll call the meeting of the City of Patasko Board of Zoning Appeals to order. And if I could have everyone stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you. Lisa, did you want to call roll?
Bruce Ashcraft.
Here.
Brandon Gaelic.
Here.
Alan Howe.
Here.
Rob Platt. TJ Rodeback. Here.
Okay, we do have a quorum, so we can just get started. But the first item on old business is a tabled application, and we were just discussing. And my understanding is that's going to continue to remain tabled potentially till the end of the year.
That's correct.
And so at this point, there's really nothing for us to do on it.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you. Then we'll move right to new business, and that would be variance 19-021, and the applicant is Robert J. Hayes of P&G Patasko, and I will turn it over to staff for their report.
Thank you, sir. The property is zoned R10, approximately 46.4 acres. This is what will be eventually the Heron Manor subdivision right to the west of the settlement. The request is for approval of two variances. One to allow for the installation of street trees at every 50 feet of public street frontage, and the second variance to allow the installation of a permanent subdivision identification sign that is of a hanging type. So the property as it stands today is outlined in yellow. The settlement is located here, Broad Street to the south, Columbia Road to the west. And this is what the subdivision layout was approved with the preliminary plan, so we're looking at the darker shaded area along the west, again Broad Street to the south. So Heron Manor, as I mentioned, is a proposed, at this point, 145 lot subdivision. They did get preliminary plan approval by Planning Commission on June 5th, and then was approved by Council on June 17th. Per section 1283.05A, street trees are required to be placed at 30-foot intervals along public street frontage. Per that section, one deciduous tree is required from the appropriate table, and those trees installed have to be 2-inch caliber as measured 5 feet above the ground. So the variance would have the trees placed at 50-foot intervals along the public street. The applicant justified the request as there's limited space after installation of driveways and utilities. It would be better horticultural practices in terms of tree spacing, eliminating costs for tree depth and replacement, limit interference with driveways and utilities, and that they're seeking relief just from the spacing requirement, not the street tree requirement altogether. So here's a diagram that was in your staff report showing the limitations with lot sizes, driveways, and the ability to meet the 30-foot requirement. The next variance is section 1295.09B8. You're permitted one permanent subdivision identification sign per entry into the subdivision. Per the code, signs are limited to monument style only. So the sign would be placed on a wall, fence, entrance column, etc. So the variance is the sign to be elevated off the ground, so hanging style. The applicant justifies this by this would allow additional landscaping in front of sign that would not block the sign face. The sign will be hanging from a monument style column, and it meets the spirit and intent of the code. So bear with me here, but this was the subdivision as we saw earlier with the sign located approximately where the star is. This is a layout of how the sign would be located on the property. Heron Avenue, excuse me, is the road that intersects with Broad Street. So that would be their sign to an entrance of the subdivision. And this is a diagram of the sign. So the sign, aside from the hanging style, meets all other requirements for subdivision signs per code. So the street trees, from a staff perspective, we've encountered this before. Broadmoor Commons, which is west side of town between Mink and Summit. They had a similar issue because of the cluster subdivision style. The lots aren't big enough to get the trees in at 30-foot intervals without causing issues with driveways, and at that time mailboxes, fire hydrants, etc. So the Planning and Zoning Commission did grant a divergence because it's a planned district. They don't need to get a variance, so all variances are included within the planned district text. So the Planning Commission did approve a divergence to allow for trees to be planted at 50-foot intervals. The hanging sign again would go back to Broadmoor Commons, same situation. Because it was a planned district, they did not have to seek a variance and instead put the variance in the development text. So they approved a divergence to allow for a hanging sign. City engineer mentioned they have no engineering comments, but did mention that the city may consider having a fee in lieu of for the trees that are eliminated. And they also said to ensure that the sign does not impact easements, utilities, or other public items of importance. Once we have the engineering plans, which is the next step in the process for the subdivision, that'll become more clear and we'll make sure that that doesn't happen. No other departments or agencies had any comments. So surrounding properties, north is zoned agriculture with the farm field and the woodland. East is R10, high density residential with single family homes, which would be the settlement. South is M1, GB, and R10, and it's a lumberyard, auto sales, and single family homes. And to the west is agriculture, and that is also a farm field. There's our findings of fact that are included in the staff report. So if the board chooses to approve the request, the following conditions may be considered. 1, the applicant shall obtain all necessary permits from the city of Pataskil within 1 year of the date of approval. And 2, the applicant shall address all comments from the city engineer. And I would be happy to answer any questions.
No questions?
What year were, for the settlement, when those were approved by the BZA? What year was that?
The settlement or Broadmoor Commons?
For Broadmoor Commons. I'm sorry.
I believe the hanging sign occurred in 16 as part of the original development, and then we had some issues earlier this year when they went to go build the houses and having the street trees. So there was replacement trees and street trees. Some lots, given their size, would have to have 8 trees on them, and there was no way to pack those in. So that occurred, I'd say, earlier this year or late last year.
Okay, so it's very recent.
That's
Okay.
correct.
Okay.
Just, I think you said it, but the follow-up on the sign, besides the hanging, all the setbacks, all the sizes, everything else was okay?
That's correct.
And it has a mantle over the top, so it's somewhat of a,
It does, yeah. So it's not,
yeah,
I think,
it's not true hanging, it has,
it would be hang, because I think the intent of the code was to have, like, if there was a fence post behind it or something along those lines, it would meet. We're kind of in the gray area here. I do agree it meets the intent.
I think, construction-wise, it's sturdy enough. Something's not gonna blow it away quite easily.
That's great. It looks, it's very attractive.
Are they lighted too?
I'm assuming it will be lit in some manner.
Anyone else have any other questions for the staff? Okay, so the applicant is Mr. Hayes, and I believe he's submitting a speaker request for him.
Yes,
Mr.
sir.
Hayes, if you want to take a step up here, and
Thank you.
Lisa will swear you in.
Raise your right hand, please. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Rob Hayes. I'm the Community Design Project Manager for Fisher Homes. Thank you for considering our request. As staff stated, the 2 components are small, we believe, technicalities. The first one being that 30 feet is an impossible requirement to build. We don't want to circumvent that. Where 50 feet is what we feel would be the most appropriate, and there's precedence for that as well. And furthermore, we pride ourselves in our theming and our landscaping of our monuments and our entryways. We believe that the Heron Manor sign as presented would be more attractive than a monument style sign and would allow us to landscape more and to have a more attractive entrance to the community. So if you have any questions, please let me know.
As far as the hanging portion, is the winds that we've been having and the weird weather, unusual weather, might I add?
Yes.
Is it to a specific code that it would upstand so many miles of wind?
Unfortunately, I don't have that information in front of me.
Okay.
It would meet all building code requirements. We obviously would obtain a building permit. We would make sure that it complied with all building requirements.
Okay.
And just to follow up on another question, are you planning on putting any lighting in there?
We would install low voltage uplighting as part of the landscaping.
And is there green space within this manor to possibly put more trees?
It is our plan to install install street trees on areas where we do not have single-family home sites, particularly at the entrance from Broad Street entering into the community, as well as there are a couple other smaller areas in the community that are not loaded streets.
Was there a number of how this would it be half of the amount of trees or a third of the amount of trees that would?
I haven't done the math on that, but typically if there's trees removed, there's a replacement required based upon caliber and species type. So that would be required as part of the landscaping plan. And the street trees would be separate from that as its own standalone requirement.
Okay.
So if you want to include the provisions from the engineer, or you can place a condition on it that any trees not, if we determine that it's supposed to be 100 trees and we determine we're only using 70 of them, then we have to find a place for the other 30 trees
Okay.
within the development.
We do have a significant amount of landscaping planned in buffer areas in the development right now.
With trees?
It's a combination, we have a combination of trees and shrubbery.
Right.
And I apologize for not including that
No, that's
landscape
fine.
plan in the application. I believe staff has reviewed that landscape plan.
Yeah, these are, it's specific to a specific delicious, is that how you pronounce it?
Deciduous.
Deciduous. I'm sorry, I'm not.
Of course.
Yes, okay. Sounds good.
Do we have any other questions for Mr. Hayes? No. Okay, Mr. Hayes.
Thank you very much. Excuse me.
Is there anyone else that would like to speak on this issue? Okay, I guess we can move to findings of the fact. Make sure we get the right one here. Okay. Basically, we'll have certain finding of facts that we have to kind of go through to kind of finalize our decision. And the first one is whether the property in question will yield a reasonable return, or if there can be a beneficial use of the property.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, we do that one. B, whether there are unique physical circumstances or conditions that prohibit the property being developed in strict conformity with the zoning regulation, such that a variance is necessary to enable the reasonable use of the property.
Yes.
I'd say yes too.
Okay. Yes. C, whether the variance requested is substantial.
No.
No.
I'd say no. Okay, no. D, whether the essential character of the neighborhood would be substantially altered, or the adjoining properties would suffer a substantial detriment as a result of the variance.
No.
No.
No. Whether the variance, if granted, will substantially or permanently impair the appropriate use or the development of the adjacent property.
No.
No.
No. F, whether the variance, if granted, will be detrimental to public welfare.
No.
No.
No. Whether the variance, if granted, would adversely affect the delivery of government services.
No.
No. H, whether the property owner purchased the subject property with knowledge of the zoning restriction. I believe I saw that that was a yes. New code, yes?
Yes.
Okay. I, whether the property owner's predicament can be obviated through some other method than variance.
That's always yes, but
Logistically, could the lots be put in as
I'd have to say probably no. I mean, I think it's you okay with no?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Everyone no?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay. J, whether the variance if granted will represent the minimum variance that will afford relief and represent the least modification possible of the requirement at issue.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And whether the spirit and intent behind the zoning requirement would be observed and substantial justice done by granting the variance.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So we have on the findings of facts, we have yes for A and B, no for C through G, yes for H, no for I, and then yes for the J and K. And I'll have that for you. Hearing the finding of the facts, is there someone who'd like to make a motion?
This is page 5.
It's actually on page 4.
I know, but it goes on to page 5. Can you put the condition, or the,
Page 5.
Yeah, I think it's, that one's on 4, I think we're good. It's page 4 of 4, so there is no 5.
but then doesn't, oh, the supplementary conditions
Yes.
is above.
Yes.
Okay, very good.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so someone want to make a motion?
I move to approve variance from section 1283.05A from section 1295.09B8 of the Pataskala Code for variance application VA-19-021 with the following supplementary conditions. The applicant shall obtain all necessary permits from the city of Pataskala within 1 year of the date of approval. 2, the applicant shall address all comments of the city engineer.
Second. Okay, so we have a motion from Ms. Rodenbeck and a second from Mr. Ashcraft. Would you like to call the roll in it?
Ms. Rodenbeck,
Yes.
Mr. Gaelick,
Yes.
Mr. Ashcraft,
Yes.
Mr. Howell.
Yes. And congratulations, Mr. Hayes. It was pretty painless. But you've been, the variance has been granted, and the staff will get with you the next couple days if, to follow up on anything else that needs to be done at this point.
Thank you very much.
And you're welcome to stay if you like, but you're certainly not required. Thank you. All right, so we move on to the next item on the agenda, which is variance VA 19-22. Mr. Paul Deason, and I'm going to turn it over to staff for a new report.
Thank you. The property is located at 489 South Main Street. It's approximately 0.28 acres in size, zoned R7, and the request is a variance from section 1221.05B2 of the code to allow for an accessory building to exceed the maximum permitted size, and a variance from section 1225.05D1 of the code to allow for an accessory building to be constructed in front of the principal structure. So the property is located here, outlined in yellow. Main Street running north-south, and Wood Street also running north-south. Mill Street is located to the south here. So the property currently has a little over 2,000 square foot home constructed in 1935 and a 96 square foot shed constructed in 2017. So the proposal is to construct a 28 by 32 or almost 900 square foot accessory building. The maximum allowable square footage is 576 square feet, and that can be divided amongst 2 accessory buildings. So we already have one on site that's 96 square feet. So total proposed would be 992 square feet, which exceeds the maximum permitted on that lot by 416 square feet. So the justification from the applicant is that the previous garage in this location was destroyed by fire approximately 10 years ago. So we can see the applicant's site plan. Here's the larger of the accessory buildings located here. Again, Wood Street is to the west, and here's the existing 96 square foot shed. Here's a picture of what the proposed larger accessory building would look like. So there was a previous variance for this property. This was approved in June of 2016. At the time, that variance was approved to allow 2 accessory buildings that would exceed the maximum permitted size. It's essentially this site plan here. So it also had the variance to allow accessory buildings to be located in front of the principal structure. Because we see this a lot in the old village, they'll have double frontages. So you have a front yard here, front yard here, and then front yard here. So there's really no backyard per se per the code. So there was a condition of approval placed upon that variance that the accessory buildings had to be constructed within a year. So as we saw, the shed was built. However, the larger building was started but not completed. And therefore, since that was not done, the variance has since expired. So it would have expired in June of 17. So as we can see, the property here, again outlined in yellow, the existing shed is here, and then we can see the beginnings of the accessory building in the rear of the yard there that, as I mentioned, was started but never completed. So as I mentioned, the double frontage, they have 2 front yards, and this would also allow the applicant to complete the building. The utility department did mention the location of the accessory building should not cause conflict with the curb box. When they reviewed, said, I don't think it'll be an issue. So all around is zoned R7, all with single family homes. Findings of fact, and then supplementary conditions. Should the board choose to approve the request, here's some conditions that could be considered. The applicant shall construct the accessory building as submitted within 1 year of the date of approval. The accessory building should not create drainage issues on adjacent properties. And 3, the applicant shall obtain all necessary permits from the city of Pataskala and the Licking County Building Department prior to construction of the accessory building. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
You said that it was passed before, or
Correct.
accepted before, and it was actually, the construction had begun.
On the, yes, the shed was completed,
Right.
but the larger building was not. It was started but not completed.
What is, I couldn't really tell from the picture, what is the status of that? How far along did they get?
It got, I don't know if it's halfway or what particularly, but I think the applicant might be able to better address that.
Gotcha. Any other questions for Sam? Questions? Okay, then is Mr. Deason here?
Yes, I am.
Good evening.
How are you?
Awesome. How about yourself?
Okay.
You can just be sworn in by Lisa.
Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So be done.
I do.
Thank you.
The only question I have is down under the modifications, it says for a pool house. The construction is for a pool house. It's actually a garage.
We noticed that today, and yeah, that's why
I was gonna say, you guys are
yeah.
gonna force me to build a pool house, 'cause I don't have a pool.
No, sometime today.
I heard that too.
Your wife did
Yes.
too.
That's for next
You're not
item.
like
We'll
it.
do a pool next.
But anyway, so as long as we're clear on that, I'm okay here.
We won't approve a pool house for you.
No,
today.
no. And I think my insurance company would like that already.
Mm. So, can you kind of just update us on the status of what happened, 2
Yeah,
years
we,
ago now?
basically, we, got all the walls up and started on the 2nd story, and I had a health issue. I found out I had, congestive heart failure, so it took me several months to get that straightened away. And now we're ready to get back at it. Should have it done in 3 to 4 months probably. Before the weather gets bad, hopefully, but.
I'm glad you're feeling better, so that's,
Yeah.
that's
Thank
certainly
you.
positive. And you look great, so
It's a
that's
very
good.
good reason.
Yeah, I lost 50 pounds, so I got rid of a 10-year-old kid I've been carrying around.
Oh.
Okay. Do we have anyone have a question from Teresa? Any questions? Pretty easy then. Thank you so much.
Okay,
If you want to
thank
have a
you.
seat, we'll do the findings of fact.
All right, thank you.
Which I just had. I get it right. Okay. So finding of facts. A, whether the property in question will yield a reasonable return or if there can be a beneficial use of the property.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. B, whether there are unique physical circumstances or conditions that prohibit the property being developed in strict conformity with the zoning regulation, that a variance is necessary to enable the reasonable use of the property.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. C, whether the variance requested is substantial.
No.
No.
No. D, whether the essential character of the neighborhood would substantially be altered or the adjoining properties would suffer a substantial detriment as a result of the variance.
No.
No.
No. E, whether the variance if granted will substantially or permanently impair the appropriate use or development of adjacent property.
No.
No. F, whether the variance if granted will be detrimental to the public welfare.
No.
No.
No. G, whether the variance if granted would adversely affect the delivery of government services.
No.
No. H, whether the property owner purchased the subject property with the knowledge of the zoning restriction.
No.
I have no idea.
I'd say no.
Say no. Whether the whether the property owner's predicament can be obviated through some other method other than variance.
No.
No.
J, whether the variance if granted will represent the minimum variance that will afford relief and represent the least modification possible of the requirement at issue.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
And K, whether the substantial spirit and intent behind the zoning requirement would be observed and substantial justice done by granting the variance.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so as we're finding the facts, we have yes for A, B, J, and K, and then C through I would all be no. Have that for you. That being said, is there any other comments or discussion on this?
No.
And if we could have a motion?
Move to approve variances from the section of 1221.05B2 and section 1225.0511 to the Pataskala Code for variance application VA 19022 with the following conditions. The applicant shall construct the accessory building as permitted within 1 year of date of approval. The accessory building shall not create drainage issues on adjacent properties. And 3, the applicant shall obtain all necessary permits from the City of Pataskala and the Licking County Building Department prior to construction of the accessory building.
Do we have a motion? Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. So we have a motion and a second. And we have roll, please.
Mr. Howe,
Yes.
Mr. Ashcraft,
Yes.
Ms. Rotobeck,
Yes.
Mr. Gaylor.
Yes.
So, motion has passed. Mr. Decent, your variance has been granted. And again, the staff will get with you in the next couple of days for anything to do, but good luck with the construction and the finalizing of your project.
Thank you.
And again, you're welcome to stay if you want. We have a few more housekeeping type issues to go over, but you don't have to stay if you don't.
I like you guys, but I think I'll go.
I don't blame you.
Good evening.
Very good. Okay. So now do we have to call the findings of facts and go through that one time? Okay, so we've got 2 finding facts. We need to,
So, if I may.
Yes.
All we have to do is say I move to approve the finding of fact as discussed for application, and we
Okay.
just have to do that for both.
okay, very good. So then I will move to approve the finding of facts for application number VA 19-021. And what do we have to do? Call roll now? Or we need a
Then
second?
second,
We need a
yes.
second.
I'll second.
Okay. We have a second? And then the roll.
Mr. Gaylor,
Yes.
Ms. Rotobeck,
Yes.
Mr. Ashcraft,
Yes.
Mr. Howe.
Yes. And then I move to approve the finding of facts as discussed for application number VA-19022. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Ashcraft, a second. And roll, please.
Ms. Rotobeck?
Yes.
Mr. Howe?
Yes.
Mr. Ashcraft?
Yes.
Mr. Gaelick?
Yes.
Thank you. So the finding of facts have been approved. We can move to, everyone should have received a copy of the August 12th minutes, and we also have a copy here tonight. We wouldn't have them before, so if, is there any comments or comments on the minutes or questions?
No.
I would move to approve those minutes if we have a second.
Second.
And we have a second. Do we have roll, please?
Mr. Gaelick?
Yes.
Ms. Rotobeck?
Yes.
Mr. Ashcraft?
Abstain.
Mr. Howe?
Yes. And
Wasn't here, I can't approve something.
last on the agenda
You didn't
is-
listen to the minutes on the recording?
has to do with you, and I want to move to approve the absence from last meeting of Bruce Ashcraft. And then do I have a second?
I'll second.
And we all have a motion and a second. If I could have roll, please.
Mr. Ashcraft?
Abstain.
Mr. Howe?
Yes.
Mr. Gaelick?
Yes.
Ms. Rotobeck?
Yes.
That being said, approved. Is there any other business for the good of the order?
No, sir.
Then with that, thank you. I adjourn the meeting.
We gotta do roll.
Oh, I
First,
apologize.
we need a first and second. We need a first and second.
Yep.
A motion. I'll
Okay.
motion to adjourn.
Second.
Mr. Ashcraft?
Here.
Mr. Howe?
Yes.
Mr. Gaelick?
Yes.
Ms. Rotobeck?
Yes.
Now can I do it?
Yeah.
There we go.
He's been waiting.